The document that arrived on that Tuesday wasn't so much a letter as it was a beige-colored declaration of war. It was printed on cardstock, thick enough to stop a low-caliber bullet, with the words, Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association, embossed at the top in a font that screamed, I have a gavel, and I'm not afraid to use it. I stood there in my entryway, mail slot light illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, and held the single sheet of paper like it was a dead fish. I read the key sentence 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't having a stroke. Furthermore, a formal complaint has been registered regarding unpleasant odors emanating from the unapproved mulch pile located at the rear of your property. Unpleasant odors? Mulch pile? My compost pile was a masterpiece. It was a carefully layered, meticulously managed, texturally perfect symphony of science and nature. It smelled less like garbage and more like the earthy, profound promise of a forest floor after a spring rain. It was the scent of life itself, of decay and rebirth, of coffee grounds and grass clippings achieving their highest calling. To call it a mulch pile was like calling the Mona Lisa a decent doodle. And unpleasant odors? The only thing unpleasant was the sheer audacity of the accusation. My wife, Sarah, walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She took one look at my face, a thundercloud of suburban rage, and sighed the weary sigh of a woman who had seen this storm gather before. Chadwick again? He called it a mulch pile, Sarah, I said, my voice low and dangerous. And he said it smells. Does it? She asked, peering over my shoulder at the letter. Of course not. It smells of ecological responsibility. It smells of future blue ribbon tomatoes. It smells like victory over the forces of entropy. So, like dirt, then, she translated, ever the pragmatist. What does he want you to do? Cease and desist. Remove the offending pile within 7 days or face a daily fine of $50. I crumpled the letter in my fist. $50 a day for making dirt. The man has lost his mind. We moved to Pleasant Valley Estates for the usual reasons. Good schools, a decent-sized yard for a dog we hadn't gotten yet, and the quiet hum of synchronized lawnmowers on a Saturday morning. It was the suburban dream, or at least a convincing high-interest rate facsimile of it. I'm an IT project manager, which means I spend 40 hours a week translating vague corporate demands into incomprehensible spreadsheets. My life is a series of Gantt charts and stakeholder meetings. My compost pile was my escape. It was tangible. I could see the results. Out there, with my pitchfork and my kitchen scraps, I wasn't just Leo Maxwell, middle manager. I was a god of decomposition, a lord of loam. And Chadwick Kensington was the serpent in my Garden of Eden. Chadwick was our HOA president, a man who seemed to have been born wearing a crisp polo shirt and an expression of profound disappointment. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair so perfectly coiffed it looked like a helmet. His entire existence seemed dedicated to the zealous enforcement of the CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that governed our little slice of beige-sided paradise. This wasn't my first rodeo with him. 6 months ago, he'd left a passive-aggressive note on our door because our mailbox, a standard-issue black number that came with the house, was, and I quote, a shade of pewter black that clashes with the approved midnight iron of the community standard. We were forced to repaint it. I'd spent an entire Saturday applying a new coat of black paint over the old coat of black paint, fuming with the heat of 1,000 suns. This, however, was different. The mailbox was an inanimate object. My compost was a living, breathing ecosystem. This was personal. Against Sarah's better judgment, her exact words were, "Leo, please don't go over there and make it worse." I marched across the street. My feet crunched on his perfectly edged lawn, a green carpet so uniform it looked like it had been installed by robots. I rang the doorbell. He opened the door holding a pair of pruning shears, as if I'd caught him mid-topiary. "Leo?" he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Chadwick," I said, holding up the now uncrumpled letter. "We need to talk about my mulch pile." "Ah, yes, the compost," he corrected himself, the word compost dripping with disdain. "I'm afraid the bylaws are quite clear." "It doesn't smell," I insisted. "I manage the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. It's an aerobic system. There's no odor." "Your neighbor, Mrs. Henderson at number 42, seems to think otherwise. She reported a pungent aroma during her afternoon tea on the veranda. Mrs. Henderson was 85 and had the olfactory senses of a brick. She wouldn't notice if a gas main exploded next to her. Chadwick was using her as a pawn. "What if I put a small fence around it?" I tried to bargain. "A tasteful HOA-approved lattice fence?" He gave a small, condescending chuckle. "It's not about the aesthetics, Leo, it's about the principle. Section 8, subsection C, paragraph 4. No accumulation of refuse, debris, or compostable materials shall be visible from the street or adjacent properties. It's a matter of community standards." I stared at him, at the perfectly trimmed hedge behind him, at the complete and utter lack of reason in his cold, gray eyes. I was beaten. He knew the rulebook better than I did, and he wielded it like a weapon. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like ash. "I'll take care of it." I walked back home, defeated. The $50 a day fine was just enough to be a serious annoyance. I couldn't afford a protracted war. As I stood in my backyard, looking at my beautiful, steaming pile of organic potential, a deep sense of injustice washed over me. I'd have to haul it all to the dump. Chadwick had won. I went inside and slumped onto the sofa next to Sarah. "You look like your dog just died," she said, putting a comforting hand on my shoulder. "And we don't even have a dog." "He beat me, Sarah. He beat me with subsection C." I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall, the gears in my mind grinding. I replayed his words over and over. No accumulation of refuse, debris, or compostable materials. The wording was specific. It was designed to outlaw a pile of stuff sitting in the yard. But my brain, the same brain that untangles complex IT workflows for a living, snagged on a loophole. He was regulating the storage method, not the act of composting itself. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. Sarah noticed immediately. "Oh no," she said. "I know that look. That's the look you got before you tried to build a brick pizza oven from YouTube tutorials and set the lawn on fire." "This is better," I said, my voice filled with a newfound, almost holy purpose. "He said I can't have a compost pile." "Yes," she said, drawing the word out cautiously. I turned to her, my eyes gleaming with the light of a terrible, brilliant, and deeply petty idea. "He didn't say anything about livestock." The next 48 hours were a blur of frenzied, obsessive research. My day job as a project manager involves a lot of deep dives into obscure technical documentation. So this was right in my wheelhouse. But instead of reading about cloud-based server architecture, I was mainlining information about the digestive tracts of invertebrates. I plunged into the weird, wonderful, and slightly slimy world of vermicomposting. My browser history became a chaotic jumble of search terms: optimal worm bedding, protein content of coffee grounds, Eisenia fetida breeding cycles, can worms eat citrus? Answer, not really, it's too acidic. I emerged from my office on Sunday morning, bleary-eyed but triumphant, a self-proclaimed expert in the art of worm farming. I found Sarah in the kitchen, calmly sipping her coffee and reading a book. "They're the perfect loophole," I announced, holding up my tablet, which displayed a close-up image of a teeming mass of red worms. Sarah glanced at the picture without flinching. She was used to my weird hobbies. "They're worms, Leo." "Not just worms," I corrected her, pacing the kitchen with the manic energy of a mad scientist. "They are Eisenia fetida, the red wiggler, nature's perfect composting machines. They eat their body weight in garbage every day. They produce no smell, just rich, beautiful castings. And the best part? We can keep them in bins, in the garage, contained, discreet, utterly, completely, and beautifully HOA compliant." She took a slow sip of her coffee, her expression unreadable. "So, let me get this straight. You're going to dismantle the pile of organic matter in the backyard." "Yes." "And replace it with thousands of writhing worms in the garage?" "It's a discrete, self-contained, protein-based waste processing system," I said, puffing out my chest. It sounded much better when I used corporate jargon. "It's a box of worms, Leo." "It's malicious compliance in its purest form," I countered. "Chadwick told me to get rid of a pile. He never said anything about a vertically integrated vermiculture habitat." She just shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "You're going to spend hundreds of dollars on worms just to annoy Chadwick, aren't you?" "It's not about the money, Sarah," I said gravely. "It's about the principle." She sighed. "Fine. But if I find a single worm in the house, the entire protein-based waste processing system is going on the curb." That was all the approval I needed. I immediately went online and ordered my starter army, 1 full pound of red wigglers from a place in Georgia called Uncle Jim's Worm Farm. The name alone inspired confidence. A pound doesn't sound like much, but according to my research, that was approximately 1,000 worms. 1,000 tiny soldiers in my silent war against Chadwick Kensington. 3 days later, a small, unassuming cardboard box arrived. It had air holes punched in the side and a sticker that read, "Live harvesting worms, perishable." I took it to the garage with the reverence of a bomb disposal technician. When I opened the box, it was not what I expected. Instead of 1,000 distinct worms, I was greeted by a single, writhing, pulsating ball of life nestled in a bed of peat moss. It seemed to be breathing. "Well, that's thoroughly disgusting," I muttered to myself, before gently tipping the entire clump into its new home. I had spent the previous evening constructing the first worm condo. It was a simple affair, made from 3 opaque plastic storage totes stacked on top of each other. I had drilled a series of holes in the bottoms for drainage and migration, and a series of holes around the top for aeration. I filled the first bin with a fluffy bedding of shredded newspaper, coconut coir, and a handful of dirt from the now dismantled compost pile to make them feel at home. I gently placed the ball of worms on top, added some pulverized eggshells and coffee grounds, misted it with water, and put the lid on. "Welcome home, boys," I whispered. "Your mission, should you choose to accept it." For the next few weeks, I became a helicopter parent to 1,000 worms. I checked their moisture levels daily. I blended their food, vegetable scraps, old bread, tea bags, into a slurry to make it easier for them to digest. I read them HOA bylaws at night so they would understand the righteousness of our cause. Okay, I didn't do that last one, but I thought about it. The best part was the day Chadwick did his victory lap. I was out front, trimming the hedges, to the regulation height, of course, when he did a slow, deliberate drive-by in his beige Lexus. He slowed down just as he passed my house, peering into my backyard. He saw the empty space where my glorious compost pile once stood. He gave me a smug, triumphant little nod, the kind a king gives a peasant he has just rightfully crushed. I gave him a serene, beatific smile back, knowing that just 30 feet away, inside my garage, My silent army was multiplying, feasting on my garbage, and plotting his downfall one casting at a time. The victory was so sweet I could almost taste it. The problem with creating a perfect, nurturing environment for a living creature is that it tends to thrive. And boy, did my worms thrive. Red wigglers, it turns out, are enthusiastic breeders. My single bin was soon overflowing. They were eating everything I could give them and turning it into an astonishing quantity of rich, dark, earthy worm castings. This stuff was black gold. It was crumbly, odorless, and packed with nutrients. My one-bin system quickly became a two-bin system. Then I had to build another stack. Then another. Within 2 months, one entire wall of my two-car garage was occupied by what I now called the vermi towers. I had gone from 1,000 worms to an estimated 10,000. They were a silent, wriggling testament to my success. They were also producing compost far faster than I could use it. My own garden was already a spectacle. My tomato plants were threatening to take over the fence, their branches heavy with fruit the size of a toddler's fist. My zucchini plants were producing vegetables that looked more like baseball bats. I had a jungle in my backyard. I started trying to give the castings away. I filled Ziploc bags and offered them to my neighbors. "Here," I'd say to Dave from next door. "Free fertilizer. It's organic." "What is it?" he'd ask, peering suspiciously at the bag of dark earth. "Worm castings," I'd say proudly. And that's where I'd lose them. The polite smile would tighten. Their eyes would dart away. "Oh, that's worm poop, Leo, right? Thanks, but my wife usually just gets a bag of Miracle Grow from Home Depot." The rejection stung. Here I was, offering them the very nectar of the gods, the secret to a bountiful harvest, and they were turning their noses up at it because it had passed through the digestive tract of a worm. It was an insult to my children, my wriggly, slimy children. One evening, I was standing in the garage, looking at a dozen gallon-sized bags of black gold I had failed to give away. My grand act of malicious compliance had an unforeseen consequence. I was drowning in a sea of high-quality worm-generated manure. It was a logistical nightmare. And as I stood there, defeated by my own prolific success, another, even more terrible and far more brilliant idea began to take root. I walked into the kitchen, holding a bag of worm castings like it was a sacred offering. Sarah was at the table, paying bills online. "We have a supply chain issue," I announced. She looked up from her laptop, unimpressed. "Are the worms on strike? Are they demanding better quality banana peels?" "Worse," I said, placing the bag on the table with a soft thud. "We have a massive surplus of finished product and a complete failure in our distribution network." "You mean nobody wants your free bags of worm poop?" "They don't appreciate the craftsmanship," I lamented. "It's like trying to give away free Picassos to people who only hang motivational posters of kittens." I slumped into a chair, the weight of my vermicultural empire heavy on my shoulders. I can't just throw it out. It feels wrong. It's the best soil amendment known to man. I stared at the bag. The castings were dark and rich, looking more like crumbled chocolate cake than anything else. An idea, a tiny, insane little spark, ignited in the back of my mind. It was the logical, if completely unhinged, next step in this whole saga. "If I can't give it away," I said slowly, the words tasting strange and wonderful, "I'll sell it." Sarah stopped typing. She slowly closed her laptop and turned her full attention to me. "I'm sorry, what?" "I'll sell it," I repeated, the idea blossoming into a full-blown strategy. "Think about it. It's the ultimate middle finger to Chadwick. I'll turn the very thing he tried to ban into a source of income. A legitimate, tax-paying commercial enterprise operating right under his perfectly sculpted nose. It's not just compliance anymore, Sarah. It's profitable compliance. You want to start a business, selling worm poop, From our garage. She laid the facts out in a flat, clinical line, trying to show me the absurdity of it. But all I heard was a brilliant business plan. We'll be entrepreneurs, titans of the soil industry, the Rockefellers of refuse. Leo, you're a project manager. And what is this if not the ultimate project? I countered, my enthusiasm now reaching fever pitch. We need a name, something punchy. How about the Vermi Vendetta or Chadwick's Folly Organics? Absolutely not, she said, finally cracking a smile. If you are seriously going to do this, you can't name it after a blood feud with the head of the HOA. People will think you're insane. But I am insane, I whispered theatrically. Insane with rage. Okay, settle down, Captain Ahab. How about something that sounds, like a real company? Something simple, like Suburban Soil or Pleasant Valley Organics. I considered it. She was right. If I was going to do this, I needed to look legitimate. The joke would be on the inside. On the outside, I would be a respectable small business owner. Suburban Soil Company, I said, testing the name. I like it. It sounds rustic yet professional. And so, Suburban Soil Company was born. That weekend, I channeled my obsessive energy into building a brand. I designed a simple logo, a cartoon worm wearing a little gardening hat, and built a basic website using a drag-and-drop builder. I took glamour shots of the castings in terracotta pots next to my mutant-sized tomatoes. Then, I took the plunge. I wrote up a little advertisement and posted it on the Westwood County Gardeners Facebook group, a wholesome corner of the internet where people shared pictures of their prize-winning hydrangeas. For sale, premium, all-organic worm castings. Locally produced by Suburban Soil Company, perfect for supercharging your vegetable gardens and flower beds. Your plants will thank you. $10 for a 5 LB bag. Porch pickup available. I hit post and leaned back, my heart pounding. I expected nothing. Maybe a few likes, a comment from some old lady asking if it was the same as the stuff from the big box store. My phone buzzed 10 minutes later. It was a message from a woman named Brenda. Brenda G. Hello, I saw your post. Your castings look lovely and dark. Is this from Red Wigglers? I've been looking for a good local source. I'll take 2 bags. I almost fell out of my chair. A real customer. Someone who knew what Red Wigglers were. Someone who used the word lovely to describe worm manure. An hour later, a sensible Subaru pulled into my driveway. An older woman with a kind face and a massive sun hat got out. This was Brenda. I met her at the end of the driveway with her 2 bags. Oh, this is just wonderful, she said, picking up a bag and peering at it. You can just tell it's good stuff. No smell at all. The castings I got online last year arrived half dried out. Freshly harvested this morning, I said, trying to sound like a seasoned professional and not a guy running a spite farm in his garage. She paid me with a crisp $20 bill. Thank you so much, young man. It's so nice to have a local supplier. I'll be sure to tell my garden club about you. She drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway, holding the $20 bill like it was the key to the city. I had done it. I had sold my first bags of processed garbage. It was the most satisfying $20 I had ever earned. I walked back into the house and held the bill up for Sarah to see. We're in business, I said. She shook her head, but she was smiling. You are unbelievable. That first sale was the validation I needed. It was proof that my crazy idea wasn't just crazy. It was a crazy idea that people would actually pay for. But Brenda's parting words, I'll be sure to tell my garden club about you, were both a promise and a threat. If the garden club came calling, my little stack of plastic bins wasn't going to cut it. My surplus was about to become a shortage. I had to scale up. Brenda was a woman of her word. The Westwood County Garden Club, it turned out, was less a small group of hobbyists and more a powerful, soil-obsessed cabal that controlled the horticultural destiny of the entire region. My phone started buzzing with messages. My weekends were no longer my own. They were a blur of porch pickups and conversations about soil pH and nitrogen levels. I sold out of my entire surplus in a week. My worms, bless their tireless little hearts, couldn't keep up with the demand. I was standing in the garage, staring at my now inadequate vermi towers, when the truth hit me. This had outgrown the malicious compliance phase. It was a real business now, and it needed real infrastructure. My DIY plastic bins were the worm equivalent of a college dorm room. I needed to build a skyscraper, and for that, I needed a professional. I found Gus in an online ad for local handymen. His website looked like it was built in 1998, and his slogan was "Gus'll fix it, no fuss." He had a 5-star rating based on 3 reviews, one of which just said he showed up. That was good enough for me. Gus arrived in a beat-up Ford Ranger that looked like it ran on rust and sheer willpower. He was a man in his late 50s with a weathered face, a grease-stained baseball cap, and eyes that had seen things you wouldn't believe. He walked into my garage, chewing on a toothpick, and surveyed the scene. "All right," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "What's the emergency?" "No emergency," I said cheerfully. "An expansion project." I unrolled a piece of paper on the hood of my car. On it, I had sketched my grand vision, a massive, floor-to-ceiling, climate-controlled, continuous flow-through vermicomposting system. I need to transform this entire wall into a series of large, interconnected, vertically integrated vermiculture habitats, I explained, pointing to my crude drawing. They need to be insulated to maintain a constant temperature of 70 degrees. We'll need ventilation, a drainage system, and easy access for harvesting. Gus stared at my drawing for a solid minute, his toothpick unmoving. He looked from the paper to my plastic bins, where the worms were silently doing their thing. He looked back at me. He took the toothpick out of his mouth. "So," he said, his voice completely deadpan, "you want me to build a bunch of big wooden boxes for your bait, and you want to put an AC unit on it, for the worms." "They're not for bait," I said defensively. "They're a workforce. And yes, they prefer a controlled climate. It optimizes productivity." "Right. Productivity," he said, nodding slowly, as if talking to a lunatic he didn't want to startle. He ran a hand over his scruffy chin. "This is going to be custom. It ain't going to be cheap." He quoted a price that made my stomach do a backflip. It was more than I had made in sales. It was more than I was comfortable spending on anything that wasn't a car or a medical emergency. I hesitated. I could see Sarah's "I told you so" face in my mind, but then I pictured Chadwick's smug nod from his Lexus. I thought of the $20 bill from Brenda. This was the point of no return. "When can you start?" I asked. For the next 2 weeks, my garage became a construction zone. Gus was a surprisingly meticulous craftsman. He built the frames out of heavy-duty lumber, insulated the walls with thick foam panels, and lined them with waterproof sheeting. It was starting to look less like a DIY project and more like a high-tech laboratory. The noise was constant. The scream of a circular saw, the thump of a nail gun. Naturally, the noise attracted attention. Specifically, Chadwick's attention. I have no proof, but I'm morally certain he was the one who filed the anonymous complaint with the police department about a possible, unlicensed automotive chop shop operating in my garage. Which is why one sunny Thursday afternoon, I found 2 of Westwood's finest standing on my doorstep. One was older, with a weary look that said he'd seen it all. This was Officer Miller. The other was young, eager, and looked like he was barely out of the academy. Officer Jenkins. "Good afternoon, sir," Officer Miller said. "We've had a report of some unusual construction and noise at this address. Mind telling us what you're working on in there?" "Not at all, officers," I said with my most charming, law-abiding smile. "Come on in. Corporate headquarters is this way." I led them through the house to the garage. Gus was in the middle of installing a small, dedicated ventilation fan. He gave the cops a curt nod and went back to his work. The two officers just stood there, their mouths slightly agape. The structure taking up my garage wall looked like some kind of bizarre, oversized piece of industrial furniture. "Sir," Officer Miller said, his professionalism clearly warring with his confusion, "can you tell me what is all this?" "This, officers," I said, sweeping my arm out proudly, "is the future of sustainable, hyper-local agriculture. This is the Suburban Soil Company Worm Palace." Officer Jenkins took a step closer, peering into one of the unfinished bins. I think I see them wiggling," he whispered to his partner. "It's a commercial worm farm," I explained. I walked them through the whole thing. The life cycle, the castings, the business model. To their credit, they listened patiently. When I was done, I handed them a folder containing copies of my LLC registration, my home business permit from the town, and my state tax ID. I had gotten my ducks in a row. Officer Miller looked through the documents, then back at the massive wooden structure. He looked at his young partner, who was still mesmerized by the worms. He sighed a deep, existential sigh. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Maxwell," he said, handing the folder back. "Just try to keep the noise down after 9 p.m. As they walked back to their patrol car, I overheard Miller say to Jenkins, "I swear these HOAs are going to be the death of us all." I couldn't have agreed more. Beating Chadwick was one thing. Having the police validate my operation as a legitimate, albeit bizarre business was a whole new level of vindication. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a week later. A producer from the local TV news station called me. Apparently, one of their reporters was a member of the Westwood Gardeners Facebook group and had been following the story of the worm guy. They thought it would make a quirky human interest piece for the Friday evening broadcast. Of course I said yes. The reporter, a cheerful woman named Michelle, showed up with a cameraman in tow. I gave them the grand tour. I showed them the finished worm palace, now fully operational and teeming with my highly productive employees. I explained the science with the passion of a convert. And when Michelle asked me what inspired me to start this business, I gave her the soundbite I had been practicing in the mirror for days. "Well, Michelle," I said, looking sincerely into the camera, "it all started with a friendly notice from our homeowners association. They have very high standards for our community, which really motivated me to find a more innovative, contained, and ultimately commercial solution to home composting. You could say they were the inspiration for the whole thing." The story aired that night, sandwiched between a segment on a runaway pig and the weekend weather forecast. I was portrayed as a quirky, eco-conscious entrepreneur. My website traffic exploded. By Monday morning, I had a backlog of over 100 orders and an inquiry from a major organic nursery in the next town over. Suburban Soil Company was officially a local sensation. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that somewhere across the street, Chadwick Kensington was watching, and his perfectly maintained world was starting to crumble. The news segment was the tipping point. Before, I was a neighborhood nuisance. Now I was a minor local celebrity. People I'd never met would wave at me in the grocery store and say, "Hey, you're the worm guy." My business had become a feel-good story about local enterprise and green living. For everyone, that is, except Chadwick Kensington. For him, it was a public humiliation. I had taken his bureaucratic edict and spun it into gold. Black gold, to be precise. The occasional customer pickup had turned into a steady trickle. A small delivery van from a local shipping company now stopped by twice a week. I was everything he stood against. An unapproved, unsanctioned, and now highly visible disruption to the serene, beige order of Pleasant Valley Estates. He was silent for 2 weeks. It was an unnerving, ominous silence. I knew he wasn't surrendering. He was reloading. He was poring over the HOA bylaws, all 200 pages of them, searching for the one sentence, the one clause, the one comma that he could use to finally bring me down. Then, the second letter arrived. It was on the same thick, self-important cardstock as the first one. This time it wasn't a violation notice. It was a summons. Notice of Special Emergency Meeting of the Pleasant Valley Estates. Homeowners Association. The purpose of the meeting was singular: to discuss and vote upon a proposed emergency amendment to the Community Bylaws, Article 4, Section 2, regarding the prohibition of all in-home commercial enterprises that require regular client traffic or commercial deliveries. He hadn't found an existing rule to use against me, so he was trying to write a new one. This was it. This was his endgame. He was trying to outlaw my business entirely. "He's making a new rule just to shut me down," I said to Sarah, waving the notice. "Is that even legal?" "It is, if a majority of the homeowners vote for it," she said, reading over my shoulder. "Leo, this is serious. He's not just trying to fine you anymore. He's trying to put you out of business." I knew she was right. This wasn't a battle I could fight with worms and witty comebacks. This was a political campaign, and I had 1 week to win the hearts and minds of my neighbors. My project manager brain kicked into high gear. I created a new project, Operation Save Suburban Soil. I spent my evenings not bagging castings, but preparing for war. I put together a PowerPoint presentation. I printed out financial statements showing the modest success of the business. I compiled a list of every positive comment from the gardening group, and I prepared my secret weapon: free samples. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It felt less like an HOA meeting and more like a town hall on the eve of a revolution. The air was thick with the scent of cheap coffee and suburban anxiety. I saw the neighborhood was clearly divided. On one side of the room sat Chadwick's loyalists, the rule followers, the curtain twitchers, the ones who complained if your trash can was left out for more than an hour after pickup. On the other side sat my supporters, the gardeners, the people who appreciated a little bit of local character, and a few who just plain didn't like Chadwick. Chadwick stood at the podium, gavel in hand, looking like a Roman senator about to condemn a gladiator. He began his speech, his voice dripping with faux concern. "My dear neighbors," he began, "I stand before you tonight, not in anger, but in sorrow. Sorrow for what our peaceful, residential community is becoming." He went on a long, winding tirade about preserving the character of our neighborhood. He used loaded words like industrial traffic, commercial blight, and unknown elements coming and going at all hours. He made it sound like I was running a meth lab, not a worm farm. "This is not about one person," he said, looking directly at me. "It is about the precedent we set. Do we want to be a quiet enclave for families, or a strip mall with bedrooms?" He finished to a smattering of applause from his side of the room. He then banged his gavel. "We will now hear from Mr. Maxwell, after which we will proceed directly to the vote." I walked up to the podium, my heart hammering in my chest. I set up my laptop and the projector. My first slide popped up on the screen behind me. It was the logo for Suburban Soil Company. "Good evening, everyone," I started, my voice steadier than I expected. "My name is Leo Maxwell, and I am the worm guy." A few chuckles rippled through my side of the room. "Chadwick is right about one thing. This is about the character of our neighborhood, but I see that character differently." I clicked to the next slide, which showed a picture of my ridiculously oversized tomatoes. "This is about the character of a neighborhood where gardens thrive. It's about a community that supports local small businesses. It's about taking something that would end up in a landfill and turning it into something beautiful." I went through my presentation. I showed them that the industrial traffic he mentioned amounted to one small van twice a week during business hours. I showed them testimonials from happy customers. I explained that my business was quiet, clean, and fully licensed. "Chadwick wants to talk about rules," I said, turning to face the crowd directly. "So let's talk about the American dream. The dream that says if you have a good idea and you work hard, you can build something for yourself. My business started in my garage because of an HOA rule. I complied. I innovated. And now another rule is being created specifically to punish that innovation. Is that the kind of community we want to be? One that stomps out success instead of celebrating it?" I finished, and there was strong applause from my supporters. But I knew speeches weren't enough. "And now," I said with a flourish, "I'd like to yield the floor to one of my earliest and most valued customers, Mrs. Brenda Gentry." Brenda, my first customer, stood up from the front row. She was a beloved figure in the community, known for her award-winning roses. "I just want to say," she began, her voice clear and strong, "that my roses have never been healthier since I started using Leo's suburban soil. My garden is the best it's ever been. Leo is providing a wonderful service to this community, and I, for one, think we should be proud of him." Another neighbor stood up. "My kids love it. He showed them the worms. It was a science lesson." One by one, a half-dozen of my customers stood up and spoke. It was an unplanned, organic wave of support. Chadwick's face went from pale to beet red. He banged his gavel furiously. "This is out of order. We will proceed to the vote." Ballots were passed out. The room was silent as people marked their choice. Yes to approve the amendment, or no to reject the amendment. The votes were collected in a wicker basket and dumped onto a table at the front. Chadwick and the HOA secretary began to count. It was excruciating. They made 2 piles. For a long time, the piles were dead even. My hands were sweating. Sarah squeezed my arm. Finally, the last ballot was placed. The NO pile was visibly, undeniably taller. The secretary cleared her throat. "The final tally is 42 in favor of the amendment and 58 against. The amendment is defeated." The room erupted. My side cheered. A wave of relief so powerful it almost knocked me over washed through me. I had won. We had won. I looked over at Chadwick. He was standing motionless, staring at the 2 piles of paper. A man whose entire world of rules and order had just been voted into irrelevance. He had been beaten at his own game, in his own clubhouse. The aftermath of the great HOA showdown was swift and decisive. It was like a spell had been broken over Pleasant Valley Estates. Chadwick Kensington, stripped of his ultimate authority by a democratic vote fueled by worm poop, became a ghost. His reign of terror was over. He stopped his patrol-like walks. His polo shirts seemed to lose their crispness. And a month later, a notice went out that he was resigning as HOA president to spend more time with his petunias. A younger, much more reasonable woman named Donna took his place. One of her first acts was to propose a community garden, for which I was asked to be the official soil consultant. The business, freed from the threat of imminent extinction, boomed. The news story, combined with the word of mouth from the HOA meeting, had turned Suburban Soil Company into a legitimate enterprise. The contract with the big organic nursery came through. I had to hire a high school kid part-time just to help me bag and weigh the castings on weekends. The Worm Palace in my garage was operating at full capacity, a silent, wriggling factory of success. It was strange. The entire venture had been born out of pure, unadulterated spite. It was a project fueled by the desire to prove one man wrong in the most convoluted way imaginable. I had wanted to annoy Chadwick, to beat him with his own rule book. But somewhere along the line, it had become something more. I actually loved it. I loved the strange science of it all. I loved talking to other gardeners, sharing tips, and seeing pictures of their thriving plants. I loved the feeling of building something real with my own two hands, something that people valued. The spite was the spark, but passion had become the fuel. One warm evening a few months later, Gus, the contractor, stopped by. His old truck rumbled to a stop in front of the house, and he ambled up the driveway holding a six-pack of beer. "Heard you won the war," he said, handing me a cold one. "Something like that," I laughed. "Couldn't have done it without the high-tech worm condos." Yeah, he grunted. But I could see a hint of pride in his eyes. He peered into the garage at the massive structure, now the humming heart of my operation. "Never in a million years, kid. I've built decks, I've remodeled kitchens, I've fixed more leaky pipes than I can count. First and only time I've ever built a climate-controlled bug box." He took a long sip of his beer. "You know," he said, a glint in his eye, "I was reading an article the other day. They say crickets are the next big thing. Protein of the future. I could build you some nice shelves for crickets. Real simple design." I just threw my head back and laughed. "I think I'll stick with the worms for now, Gus. Thanks." He shrugged, grinned, and finished his beer. "Your loss. Let me know if you change your mind." Later that night, Sarah and I were sitting on our back patio. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over our yard. The garden, a testament to the fruits of my labor, was a riot of color and life. The tomato vines were creeping up their trellises, the pepper plants were heavy with fruit, and Brenda's roses, which she'd given us a cutting from, were blooming in a spectacular burst of crimson. The air was filled with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. It was peaceful. The quiet hum of the suburbs I had once found monotonous now felt like a well-earned peace. "You know," Sarah said, swirling the wine in her glass, "a year ago you were furious about a letter. Now you're a captain of industry." "A captain of the invertebrate industry," I corrected her. "It's a very niche market." "Are you happy you did it? All of it?" I thought about the stress, the expense, the endless hours spent shredding newspaper and blending vegetable scraps. I thought about the confrontation with Chadwick and the nerve-wracking HOA meeting. "Yeah," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face. It was never really about the compost. It was about refusing to let someone tell me I couldn't do something just because they had a rule book. It started as a vendetta, but it had turned into my victory. I had created a business, a community of fellow gardeners, and the best damn zucchini on the block. All because one man told me my hobby smelled. Sarah raised her glass in a toast. "To the worms," she said, her eyes sparkling in the twilight. I clinked my glass against hers, the sound clear and bright in the quiet evening. "To the worms," I said, "and to the glorious, beautiful, and highly profitable power of being a pain in the HOA's ass.